Hello, everyone, and welcome to Data Entropy Talk by Sifflet. I am your hostess. My name is Salma. I'm CEO and one of the co-founders here at Sifflet. I'm wearing my DBT t-shirt today, actually. And very excited today to welcome somebody that coined a term and kind of pioneered the concept that's been making a lot of people in the data space intrigued and a lot of people talking about it. So I'm extremely happy to welcome Andrew Jones, who's a tech lead at GoCardless. Andrew, do you want to go and introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. So I'm tech lead at GoCardless. If you haven't heard of GoCardless, we are a fintech based in London, focused on recurring payments. We're based in London, but operating in many countries around the world. I'm a tech lead. I work across the data infrastructure and machine learning teams at GoCardless. That's me. Great to be here.
Awesome, great. So I guess before we go and delve into the topic du jour, which is data contracts, would love to understand a bit better about, how your career evolved all the way up to you becoming a tech lead at GoCardless, and also like what are the different roles that you had over the past few years, and more importantly, like what kind of, how did that shape your career and how you got to become, or to have the role that you have now at GoCardless?
Yeah, sure. So I've got more of a sort of software engineering background really. So that's where I spent most of my career. I'm moving into data sort of more recently. So before GoCardless, I worked at a company called ARM, a chip design company. And from there, I worked in various kind of software engineering roles, supporting kind of how we sort of test our designs internally. So things like sort of high performance clusters and things like that. And we started to gather a lot of data, test results, a lot of data, and then we started to we need some sort of data platform to kind of manage that and put that and store that. And that's where I started getting kind of moving into more data, kind of data world and the data industry. So we looked at like tools like Spark and things like that. And then I joined GoCardless about 5 years ago, and I was the sort of first data engineer hire at GoCardless.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and at the time there was like nothing. We didn't have a data platform. We just had like a copy of our database that we took a snapshot of every night, point tableau at it, and that was kind of it. So sort of me and the team since then have been building out everything from scratch, which obviously be quite exciting. Got the opportunity, and that's kind of brings me to where I am now, really.
Awesome. And so I love that you kind of started things from scratch almost at GoCardless, and there's a question that I get asked a lot, and I like to ask other data leaders about as well, is how do you feel from your vantage point has the data engineering space, broadly speaking, evolved over the past few years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we obviously, like a lot of people saying that, like we're kind of taking more and more kind of from software engineering and from DevOps and things like that. And I think that's really true because, like, even I'm also particularly involved with a lot of the kind of ETL tools, but we're using things like sort of business objects and kind of GUI based. And now obviously we're using, now obviously it's more things like DBT and more sort of engineering practices and more sort of Git for version control and more sort of CI checks and things like that, and automated deploys and things like that. So yeah, clearly we're taking a lot more from the software engineering industry and bringing that over to data engineering. And like, I think that's kind of, it makes a lot of sense to do that. It's quite exciting time to see how all these kind of things are changing in the data industry and kind of bring it more up to date in a way, but also a bit more flexible, a bit more mature, I guess, in a way.
Absolutely. I do agree with you a lot on the fact that software engineering in general kind of being a more mature category in engineering in general. We definitely see a lot more adoption of software engineering skills in data, and I think this is a really good thing to see. And obviously, the observability as the thing that you focus on here at Sifflet is one of those things. Awesome. So I guess still on the topic of adopting best practices from software engineering and applying them to data, I guess that gives us a good segue to talking about data contracts. So Andrew, what is your definition for what is a data contract is, and how did the idea emerge by working at GoCardless?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with how it emerged first and then kind of get to definition because I think that's quite interesting. So I mentioned like we don't go GoCardless kind of 5 years, we kind of had start from scratch and we kind of built a data platform in a way that most people can't build it these days where you try and get all data into data warehouse. We deployed our sort of change data capture service, our CDC service, and just sucked all data out of our databases and chucked it into BigQuery as a data warehouse, but chucked it into there. And then sort of brought in tools like Airflow and dbt to try and transform that into something useful. So that's kind of where it came from. And then the problems we had are probably problems that are familiar to many people where like, it wasn't very reliable. Pipelines weren't very reliable. The data itself wasn't documented. It was very hard to understand. You had to know a lot about upstream services to really understand the data because it wasn't really designed. Essentially, it wasn't designed for consumption. It's designed to serve the needs of that transactional. It's a transaction database serving the needs of that service. So really, to understand it, relied on a lot of institutional technology, relied on a lot of like people being a long time and people asking questions on Slack. There's no documentation. But the main problem is it's unreliable, and it meant like an issue of day really where like revenue numbers doubled overnight, and like when it's as unreliable as that, and you try and build like I kind of trying to use that data more in different areas as well. So we're trying to build products based on it, particularly ML-based products. And if you can't have confidence in data and it's not reliable enough to do that, then like, how are you supposed to build good ML models and how are you supposed to do good analytics on that data? How are you supposed to use it to drive decisions if you can't necessarily trust it? So those are the kind of problems we're having. And that kind of what led us to data contracts. We kind of thought there must be a better way to do this. And data contracts kind of came out of that. And in terms of like definition, it's interesting. I mean, data contracts can be a number of things really, but for us, it's really about an interface between like those producing data and those consuming data. Mm-hmm. The analogy we always use is just like an API. So the reason why between service and services you build APIs rather than connect to databases, you want something that's reliable, you want it documented, you want a schema, you want this kind of separation between internal models and what you're providing to your consumers. You want things like SLOs and sort of guarantees around uptime and support and things like that. And we thought, well, we all want those things for our data too. Like if our data is also important and we're building products on it and services on it, then we want the same sort of things. And like with an API, you often call it a kind of contract between like the producer and consumer, and that's kind of where we like, well, we want the data, we'll call it data contracts. We didn't really think that was the best name, but we never thought a better one. And here we are, and everyone's kind of talking about it. But that's kind of where it came from. So that's kind of my definition. It's really about the interface and this kind of separation between internal models and what people are consuming.
No, I think the name is good because it's pretty. I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory in the way that if you say you kind of almost start thinking about there is like almost a transactional relationship between two people, and in this case, data consumers and data producers and data consumers. So no, I think data contract is actually a good name. So very interesting and very interesting to see where how the story originated and I want to hone in on something you said, because you mentioned that initially there was a lot of discussions with different teams and trying to figure out how to make data reliability something more standardized, and eventually it led to the creation of the concept of API for data or data contracts. How were you able to get, I guess, buy-in internally and kind of convert people to this new religion that is data contracts and make it become the de facto way for how, I guess, I don't know, modern ELT processes then at GoCardless, if I'm not oversimplifying it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So obviously when we first came up with this idea, kind of took it to the sort of data teams, the BI teams, data science teams. Obviously they were sold quite easily, like this sounds great, it's exactly what we want. And then we thought, okay, we'll take the engineering teams next. And we wasn't really sure how I'd take it. Because it sounds, at some point you can say it sounds a bit like more work for them and they're busy and whatever else. But actually it was much easier than we thought it would be, really. Like once we explained to them the problems, the changes, schema changes and things that we're having on people downstream, because I had no idea people using downstream. I had no idea that kind of moving columns around in our database broke revenue numbers. I didn't really see a connection. It was completely invisible to them. So explaining to them the problems that it was causing, and when we can't explain to them just an idea again of the API, it's something very, very easy to understand. They wouldn't give out database credential to another service and expect that to call another service to call their database and do what they want. They would always create an interface and API, even even if there wasn't like massive value associated with that other service. Like, it's just a good practice. So once we explain to them that like we basically want the same things, an interface and API for data, yeah, it's actually they understood it straight away, the engineering teams.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't as bad as you might think. I mean, obviously, like, despite that, that's kind of first thing. But it's more like, that's not enough really, just say create an API, create data contracts. Like, what we're trying to do with data contracts is really to improve data quality. And to do that, you need to get these producers and consumers talking to each other a lot more than they were previously. And it's that kind of culture change that we are trying to push through via data contracts, really. We'd like to say that like data contracts kind of like a vessel for making this culture change. And that's where we spend much of our time, really. It's not the tooling so much, that was fairly straightforward. It's more about this culture change, more about getting, like, for one example is like our consumers, they're kind of so used to just getting what they're given. They're not really asking for better quality data, even though they've got this new mechanism, this kind of contracts. We're trying to get them more talking to each other more. It's kind of like a new muscle we have to train, really, in a way. We're just not used to asking for better requirements. Similarly, like our sort of project scope documents don't really include anything about have you thought about the data you need to produce as part of this project. So little things like that we're trying to change to really like make data production like deliberate, almost like a kind of first class thing, not just something you do as kind of a side effect or kind of by accident and you know happen to suck out your database, but make it much more deliberate, much more thought going into it, much more not just producing everything, but producing what those consumers need. What do they need it for? So if they need, I don't know, some signals to help train a fraud model, what are they? How can we produce it to them? So I don't have to do loads of ETL, loads of joins, loads of business logic in the ETL layer. Let's do that upstream, produce data they actually want, they can consume and then use it more effectively for a better result, ultimately a better fraud model or better analytics, or whatever the actual result will be.
Absolutely. And so if I want to just zoom back on the technology side, how were the very early days of implementing data contracts at GoCardless like?
Yeah, so what we did at the start was we tried to find like sort of teams to kind of POC with upfront, like you know, good kind of use cases with producing new data. We know it's going to be used by, say, the data scientists or by some consumers. Let's try a new way of doing it. So we tried to find some of those early on. We also did like kind of a POC implementation, more like an MVP, but it only took us like a couple of weeks. And kind of, you know, we showed that to everyone. We tried to get buy-in. We tried to explain. We got a lot of early feedback. So one example of feedback, for example, from the engineering teams was, yeah, they don't want to be using things like Avro or Protobuf or things like that. We tend to use Ruby a lot at GoCardless. The libraries for like Avro and Protobuf are not very good in Ruby. And they wanted to use like JSON everywhere. JSON is like much more universal. So I was like, okay, that's fine. We can use JSON as interchange format. We don't have to use the default data tooling that we used to use. Like, that's fine. So we tried to get feedback early. I think little things like that were quite important. And then yeah, try to get a POC team, and then try to get sort of use cases going from start to end. And that's how we started. But it's important to make sure that everyone felt they listened to it, particularly engineering teams. Like, this is something we're asking them to do. So make sure that they had a chance to feedback into solution and it's something they're comfortable with. It was really important at the start. I had to get a buy-in.
Yeah. And how were you able to, I guess, because what I see a lot with, you know, POCs in general is that, you know, you want to start with a small scope that is complex enough to validate the concept, but also like, you know, simple enough that it's not, you know, a whole new project and it's just something that you can do relatively with, you know, in an optimized way with regards to resources. What were some of like the key results that were observed in the very beginning that showed the team that, okay, this is a concept that's here to stay and we're going to expand it further?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're quite lucky at GoCardless. We had like we quite mature infrastructure platform we can build on. So the implementation was quite straightforward and it was using technology people were used to. So it wasn't like we were building something like separate. It's kind of built into web engineers expect this kind of thing to build in using the same technology, the same tooling that they use to deploy a service in Kubernetes, for example, to set up a BigQuery table or pub subtopic. It's using the same tooling. We should build data contract into that tooling. So it felt very familiar to them straight from the start, and that's why I didn't take too much effort for us to build. I mean, in terms of like the key results, from the start we tried to build in like kind of adoption rate and try to track that. But mostly, I guess it was, particularly at the start, it's mostly sort of myself, and we've got a really good product manager. So me and her like spending a lot of time with these teams, really like hand holding in a way. Make sure everyone knew the benefits of why we're doing this. I keep going back to why, the problems trying to solve. And I meant to take and make sure we just took the feedback on, and or constantly ask for feedback, constantly ask for what's going well, what I don't like, what I do like, and iterate on that. Yeah, so mostly talking again. It's always kind of mostly the people side.
Of course. Yeah, that's actually the most challenging part. And I see a lot of organizations that try to adopt, concepts like data mesh and decentralizing their infrastructure and making both the infrastructure and the data democratized, at the expense of using a buzzword. It actually thinking about the people and how you're gonna manage the people around you to ease the adoption and make the initiative successful is much harder than buying software and investing in technology. So it's interesting to see that, and I mean, I'm not surprised at all that it's a big element that plays out in the implementation of data contracts as well. So if you're speaking to somebody who's just getting started with, they're thinking about data contracts, they find them to be like a quite intriguing concept, and they want to implement them at their organization, where should they be looking first? Apart from reading your blogs and following you on LinkedIn and listening to all the amazing content out there.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like kind of like you alluded to, like you have to be really clear on the problems trying to solve data contracts. So it's not just like something you're going to go implement and suddenly you'll get better quality data. Like you have to try and be part of your plan for like how you want to make this change in your organization. I mean, in terms of actually trying to implement it and like where to look and stuff, like there are many ways to implement data contracts. I think like we happen to be doing a particular way, which I just mentioned we've kind of written about on our blog. It kind of relies a bit on our infrastructure setup. But you could easily, there's many ways you can do it. You could have like a Git repo with schemas in it. You could use Kafka and schema tree. There's so many ways you can do that, and it almost doesn't matter really. What matters is like you understand how it's going to solve problems, and the solution kind of fits the organization. So, like if your organization isn't used to creating schemas, we weren't really. We had some teams that were kind of quite receptive to using schemas, but some teams were like, well, that seems like quite effort. So like we had to convince them of the importance of that and why we want strongly typed schemas and why we want validation at the infrastructure level and things like that. So like you can't just go and drop in like, oh, we're going to deploy Kafka, put schema registry behind it and say, okay, we've done data contracts. Like, on its own, that's not going to achieve much. You need to have everything else around it as well.
I agree a lot. And so you guys started with the concept, or I guess toying with the concept about a year ago, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, so the first implementation was a POC was about a year ago, and the kind of idea is about a year and a half ago. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And then you published your very famous article reflecting on the first 6 months of implementing the data contracts, and then more recently you published something about like the kind of the longer journey. What were some of the key takeaways, I guess, from the phase one of implementing the data contracts to now having what I understand from your introduction, having data contracts as a de facto way almost within the organization? So what were some of the key learnings there?
Yeah, good question. I think I'll probably go back to the same kind of similar answers really. It's all about like communication. It's all about people. So like we have to keep kind of constantly reminding people like why we're doing this. Like you send out comments, but unless people know if it's going to read them. But sometimes at times it felt like the teams are like, well, we're just doing gate contracts, we were told to do it, we don't understand why. And then again, that's not really going to improve data quality if people are just doing it, but kind of not thinking about why we're doing it, why we're producing data, who they're producing it for, things like that. So making sure we kind of kept people why. We're starting up like a sort of a newsletter, data contract newsletter, to kind of highlight, again, to remind people why, but also highlight success stories, highlight times where like, a team produced good quality data, enabled a good outcome downstream, and consumers were able to use it quickly, or whatever it might be. So trying to reiterate why as much as we can. So that's really the key learning. We haven't really got any learnings around the tooling. Tooling itself has been kind of fine. Obviously, it can always be improved, and we can iterate on it over time. But kind of what we had in place was what turned out to be pretty well designed, I guess. It's obviously a bit lucky, but like we did spend a bit of time on it. So, for example, we added like data categorization fields in the schemas from the start. So, is it personal data? Is it related to particular entities? Like for us, would be like sort of payments and merchants and things like that. Even though we didn't have any tooling that used it at the time, we just wanted to make sure it was in from the start, because we've known previously that like trying to categorize data later, like when GDPR came in a few years back, was actually a bit of a nightmare. And people were doing it again, like kind of tick box exercise, but weren't really understanding why and weren't keeping up to date. So we made it a requirement early on. And like it does have friction, a bit more friction, but like we thought it's important to do. We're obviously being a payments company, we handle a lot of sensitive data. We want to make sure we're doing that right.
Yeah. One thing that comes to my mind as I hear you describe the early results is that if I think about if I reflect on my past experience and I, see if I could have implemented data contracts, or my team would have implemented data contracts, naturally, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there is a lot of upfront work that needs to be done to define the schemas that will be changed anyway. So how does that, am I seeing this the right way? How does that, how do you take that, I guess, evolving nature of schemas in making data contracts something that doesn't require a lot of ongoing maintenance, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, that is, as I speak to other people about data contracts and read more articles about it these days, like it's often a concern that like it's a lot of upfront investment, data changes, does it kind of slow things down or start for innovation or whatever. And that was kind of our worries. We built it from the start that the contract could evolve, so it's got versions and it can evolve. And that's obviously we thought it was important, because one of the problems we had before data contracts was schema changes being unexpected, breaking things downstream like immediately. And again, like an API, if you can imagine an API, like say Slack API, people can build businesses on that, and they can be fairly certain it's not going to change too often. I mean, if when it does, Slack will have some migration plan, and you'd hope, and you have a few months to move over and things like that. We can't want the same principles for data contracts internally. So we built all that from the start, but we still got a lot of feedback early on saying, well, we're going to have to change it, it's a lot, and it's going to be too much effort. But actually, now we're kind of a year in, we're not seeing contract change as much as we thought we would. We're not seeing data, at least with breaking changes. Non-breaking changes can evolve without a new version, but breaking changes require a new version. I think the reason for that is because, data does change to a degree, but really not as much as you think. I think once, say, for example, when I joined GoCardless 5 years ago, it was a lot smaller. But our kind of key data models were around sort of payments and bank accounts and things like that. And back then, we kind of only moved data via direct debit and only in certain countries. Since then, we've expanded to many more countries around the world. We use open banking now as well as direct debit for payments. But the entities are still the same. It's still payments, bank accounts. There might be a new field saying geos, like geography. It might be a new field saying whether it's open banking or not, or whatever it might be. But the actual, the key models around GoCardless are still the same. I think that's kind of the same for any company. Once you've got product market fit, you have new products, you might expand to different countries, you might do things slightly differently, but the actual models that people care about downstream, like in analytics or data science, it's like how many payments have I made in the last 30 days, or what's our revenue number, or what's our churn rate. they're all kind of quite stable data models to build on. So like, yeah, I feel like we kind of maybe overestimate how often data changes, really, or at least significant changes, where you might need a new version. Like non-break changes are fine, but significant changes to data models, they don't have at least so far recently, they don't have as much as we might have thought at the start.
Mm-hmm. I see. Seems to me like you're soon enough going to need something to monitor schema changes and the lineage and how different contracts interact with each other. Shameless plug. So I see we have a few questions from the audience. I myself have some questions left as well, but maybe let's take one question here. Claire is asking, who is responsible to maintain the data contracts at GoCardless, and who do you think should be responsible for maintaining them in general? Like, what is the persona who should own data contracts?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we made the decision early on really about like we want responsibility to be the people who produce data, and that's what we're really using data contracts to try and drive. To like try and move responsibility of the data and the contract itself to those producing the data, move it upstream. We shouldn't have like data engineering teams sitting like downstream who they don't really understand the data. You know, it's not bad data. They're not best placed to kind of decide how it evolves, not best place to put business logic in, but try to replicate what's going on upstream. The best people to do that are those producing the data and actually managing the data day to day. And they can either do that kind of before they produce a contract, or you know they can use tools like DBT2 engineering teams. That's fine. But we're very clear about the responsibility and accountability on this data. It's their data, it's their contract, and owned by producers.
Makes sense. I agree. And we have another question from Sean. Could you share any trade-offs working or adopting, I guess, a data contracts methodology to improve data quality at GoCardless compared to other solutions? I don't know what Sean means by this specifically, but if you want to answer, and then maybe we'll take a follow-up question.
Yeah, so rather than other solutions, I guess like the solution we had before was kind of like more traditional kind of data platforms. You had like change data service. You have like sort of a BI layer with like you have a staging area, and then you try and manage schema changes there. And yeah, obviously the trade-offs we felt there, it's like just unreliable. It's just poorly documented. It's the data being managed by people who don't ultimately are not actually responsible for the data and how it's produced and how it's structured. They're being managed by data engineers. And you know, if that goes badly, you know, you end up losing trust in the data completely. So that's kind of the only one I can think of in terms of like alternatives, like the kind of traditional way of building data platforms. I guess there are alternative ways of implementing data contracts. I can't mention there's like many ways you can do that. But really the trade-offs there are much the same, I think. There's not so many, it's more the principles of data contracts, more the kind of deciding to go with something more upstream, something that adds friction intentionally, but is designed to produce just deliberately the data you want downstream, not just produce everything as quick as possible, but ultimately is not necessarily valuable. So hopefully that answers your question, Sean, but if you've got any follow-ups, let us know.
Great. We have another question from Larry. What do you think of data contracts applied to the data mesh?
That's a good question. Certainly when I was kind of coming up with ideas around data contracts, or kind of Googling around like what we could do about this. Obviously, I read the original data mesh article, part of that. I think at the time I just wasn't aware, or it wasn't as quite popular as it is now, the data mesh ideas, but certainly I was very inspired by that in terms of the ideas around decentralization, the ideas around moving responsibility to producers. All of that came from data mesh. I think one of the reasons I didn't want to use the term data mesh internally was it's just like a bit almost like overloaded these days, or a bit big. Like it's whereas I've heard that contract's a bit more specific, a bit more like at least internally, like it's very obvious what we're talking about. And it's talking about this contract between producers and consumers, and it became very clear what we're talking about. Whereas data mesh is a bit more abstract, I think, or a bit more just bigger, I guess, in a way. But certainly like they certainly go hand in hand, I think. And certainly we're all part of the same kind of trying to solve the same problems. It's just maybe a different way of approaching it, or maybe data contract is part of data mesh in terms of like that interface between the kind of
That's
the
what I was
data
going to say.
products. Yeah. So maybe that's how it interacts. So maybe what we are building with is data mesh.
Yeah, it almost feels to me like data contract is a practical application of one of the concepts of data mesh. Sorry, data contract is one of that. So in essence, it ties back to the same philosophy. But at the same time, data contracts are something that you can actually go and implement tomorrow and like see the results, and data mesh is much broader than that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it covers a whole of other aspects. It could be that the future or the evolution of data contracts, or somebody who adopts data contracts, is to go full on in a data mesh type of architecture. It could be a possible evolution. So that brings me to my question: what is the future of data contracts look like at GoCardless? And how do you think this concept is going to evolve, broadly speaking? Because I know you coined the term. There's a few other organizations that are going slightly different ways around this and how they define data contracts. But I think broadly speaking, everything ties to the same philosophy and to the same principle, which is kind of, codifying certain expectations about the data in a contract that's being served to the consumer. So what does the future of data contracts look like?
Yeah, for us to GoCardless, like immediate future is we're going to turn off our sort of old CDC pipelines next year. So that it's kind of like a forcing function for everyone to get onto data contracts. So that's going to happen next year. We're actually turning off an older kind of almost a precursor data contracts this month, end of October. So that's coming in a few days. So we're seeing a lot more people use data contracts in the last couple of months as they kind of migrate off this older pipeline. So that's going to be a forcing function to get everyone to data contracts, and hopefully start to improve data quality and start to get conversations between consumers and producers talking, conversations happening a lot more. Probably won't necessarily happen overnight and like that suddenly we're back about data quality, but we're focusing on getting everyone migrated. So at least we're on we've got foundation tooling wise, and we always use the same terms. And then on we can work out how best to improve data quality, actually get better value from data. So that might be like, do we need to do kind of org changes, maybe to better support these teams? One of the things like these engineering teams don't necessarily know how best to model data for analytical teams. So maybe we can do something there and the org. Could be like, we haven't actually got a definition internally of like what good quality data is. So maybe telling one of those might be useful, or what does it mean to be data driven if we're saying we want to be that. So kind of think on more the culture side, some of those things as well, we still need to do. I know other companies, you mentioned other companies kind of taking a slightly different approach. I know some people have like gone for quite heavy, or I think heavy, but that's an opinion, like gone for like doing like sort of data modeling exercises or domain modeling exercises up front, then trying to do contracts. We haven't done it that way. We've tried to just move on to it, and then if we have to do that in future, we can do, but at least we're in a better place to do that. I don't know if we're right or not. That's only future I say, but
if it's working for you, it's working for you.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing. Like, it's still early days. What works for us won't necessarily work for everyone else. We'll work it out. But the main thing is like, you mentioned other companies doing it differently. Like, what feature of data contracts? I mean, it's going to be different to every company, but as long as people are doing it with the right sort of principles and trying to solve those problems, understand the problems they're solving, understand the principles they want to put in place via data contracts, that's the main thing, I think, and we can work out exactly how best to get there and learn from those kind of mistakes over the next couple of years or so.
Awesome. That sounds very exciting. I love how you put an emphasis on people in the whole, because it is a paradigm shift. It is, when I first heard about data contracts and I started learning about them, my immediate reaction was, this sounds a bit, complicated. I'm pretty sure they'll have some friction internally on the adoption, or I was really curious to see how you were going around it. And I have a perfect answer to my question, because you focused on people and how ultimately, the adopters of the data contracts, the data consumers, the data producers were aligned around the concept. And I think in general, when you because obviously it is a technology solution in a way, or is it like a change in the technology implementation? But because from the beginning you knew that this was your way of improving data quality at GoCardless. I think that that had more people interested and focused on it and wanting to actually invest in it because everybody wants to take data quality seriously. So that's wonderful. Let me see if there's any other questions from the audience. Do you plan on trademarking the term? I think you should.
Yeah, no, not really. Yeah, I'm not in this to get rich. I just enjoy talking about it. I enjoy like sharing my knowledge. I've yet to earn a penny from it, but I don't mind.
Good.
I'm just like talking about it.
Awesome. This is what I love about the data community. There's a lot of knowledge sharing, and it's great. We have a question from Claire. Thank you for your answers. Can you summarize in a few points what's important to keep in mind when implementing data contracts?
Yeah. Again, like it's a problem you're trying to solve, making sure you got that. And making sure that the solution that works for you. Make sure like producers in particular are like involved. Like consumers, they know they're going to get better quality, or they hope they're going to get better quality data. It's quite easy to sell, but you've got the producers actually like you are intentionally adding friction, or at least the way we've implemented it, we're intentionally adding friction to and work to the producer. We're saying, okay, we're not going to kind of suck data from your database and you don't really know about it. We're going to say you have to produce this data as part of your projects, produce the data you need as part of your job to do that. And we're going to, and actually, and you mentioned about like other teams, other companies doing it differently. We've chosen, I guess, one of the higher friction approaches in terms of like how you define a contract, how it's versioned, you can't get things in unless it matches schema, things like that. And that's what we think is going to work best for us, because we think like if data is actually valuable as we say it is, and like everyone on this call I'm sure will say like data is valuable, we should be data driven, data is new oil, whatever we want to say, but like
there's a lot of slogans, there's a lot of obnoxious slogans.
Yeah, I don't know any of them, or many of them, but we also think we're saying pushing the crowd, but we also think like data is valuable, and I think the reason why we're able to get this through at GoCardless with a relatively high friction approach is because we are using data more and more in products we're selling to our customers. So if you look at our website, we've got a product called Protect Plus and Second Plus, which are relatively new, all ML driven. Obviously, fraud is very important for us, and fraud losses are measurable in dollars, so you can directly tie that. So we've had to kind of sell it, but again, like it's kind of it wasn't as hard to sell as we thought it would be. Really, like people understand, engineers understand, but like yes, this is part of the company's goal is to use our data to differentiate, to build products that differentiate in the market, to help us be successful, to earn revenue. How can we do that if data is not reliable? How do you make it more reliable? As well, we have a bit more friction and be a bit more deliberate how we do that. We have API, we have schemas, and we have SLOs and things like that. So yeah, I think actually we're quite lucky in a way at GoCardless that we're kind of doing this at the same sort of time as the engineering teams are also starting. We're kind of at that level of maturity where we're starting to think a lot more about internal SLOs and starting to think a lot more about in between service and service communication about like we need better schemas here. We need essentially contract opportunities. Actually, a lot of these service communications using data contracts, not just for analytics consumers, it's for other services consumers using data contracts to build up pop-up topics of a schema. They're all the same sort of things. So everyone was kind of talking about this anyway in GoCardless, and then we said, but also data teams also care about this, and this is why. And I guess it's lucky timing, but for us, it's working for us.
Awesome, great. So I guess we can wrap it up here. Andrew, where can people find you and learn more about data contracts in general?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, so you can find me on there. We've got a Medium blog. Again, search for me on Medium or search for GoCardless on Medium. You can find blog posts we've been talking about. And my personal website as well, links to blog posts and other kind of things I've been doing around data contracts and other chats I've been having. So any of those places. And feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. Like, I enjoy talking about that sort of stuff. So I'm happy to kind of answer questions on like DMs and things like that on LinkedIn as well. So happy to continue the conversation after if anyone would like to.
Awesome, amazing. One last question from Sean. What's the feedback you have received so far from the data community?
Yeah, I think generally pretty good. Again, like kind of problems have been very universal. Like everyone understands problems, particularly in the data community, about like kind of unreliable data and expensive pipelines that are not necessarily trusted. The problems are universal. I think now it's kind of got a lot more popular in the last month or two. I'm sure on Twitter and LinkedIn or whatever, and lot more articles about it. You get questions about like, yeah, is it a bit heavy? Is it a bit soft information? Things like that. But like I said, we think it's worth it because the data is worth it. So I think feedback's generally been pretty good. It'd be good, yeah, a lot of conversations. It's been great hearing about other teams and companies doing it. And look, many companies have been doing it for longer than the kind of us before we had a name for it. But so it'd be great to speak into like some of those companies as well and how they've managed to do migrations from kind of, again, many of them doing migrations from C2C to kind of data contracts kind of style. So it's been really, really great engaging the community and learning about, you know, speaking to all these different people and learning about how they've done it and how problems they face and the learnings they've had.
Absolutely. Great. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Andrew, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. Every time I speak to you, I learn something new. This is amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Bye-bye.
Cool. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.